Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll wait just 1 minute more. Please let us know if the chat is working, so you can write on chat where are you from and from which country you're joining today. Yeah, it's preferred to use the chat option because there's also a Q&A option, like a panel opened. But if you want to write something outside of the question you've got, you can also write it on our chat. It should be visible on the right side of the screen. Okay, I think that we can start officially our meeting. So on behalf of the European Network Remembrance and Solidarity, I would like to welcome all of you during our today's afternoon session. A few technical remarks. I already told you about the chat, but also your cameras and microphones are turned off because we're in the webinar mode. But if you want to communicate us, you can use Q&A session or you can use chat window. This webinar is recorded, but due to the fact that it's a webinar mode, your information on the chat won't be displayed anywhere. Our meeting will last 1 hour and 30 minutes, so we are here until 5:30. Short remark about the translation. There is a translation into Albanian provided due to our Albanian partners. So if you would like to listen to the webinar in Albanian, you can click on the globe, little globe, which is below, and then switch to French. This is unusual, but unfortunately, the Zoom provides only a couple of names of the languages. We hope to have the translation for different languages in the future, too, of our webinars. So I'll start with our guest speaker. So today there's Bartłomiej Gajos with us, Dr. Bartłomiej Gajos. He's a senior research fellow at the Mieroszewski Centre for Dialogue. He's a specialist in Soviet history and the politics of memory. So hi, Bartek. Nice to have you.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yeah, hi. I'll give the floor to Bartek in the second part of our meeting. There is also Olga, who's my colleague from our office in Warsaw, and she's going to moderate discussion on chat, so you can ask her question. And my name is Urszula Bios. I'm project coordinator for the High Story Lessons online platform. I'm historian, teacher, trainer, and educator. Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen to provide you with the presentation. So how we are going to proceed today? First of all, I'll have some open remarks about the organization and the goals of the meeting. Then I'll give the floor to Bartłomiej, who will introduce us to the topic, who's got a very insightful presentation, and I really encourage you to listen actively, to think about your questions, because there will be, after his presentation, there will be a Q&A session, a time when you're able to ask your questions. So that's the setup for our meeting. And today we've got 3 goals for today. So first one is to understand how Russia manipulates the Second World War history to justify action against Ukraine, and learn which historical sources might help you to teach about the World War II disinformation, because besides of the speaker, there's also our audience, and we've seen from the registration forms you filled that the majority of you, those are teachers and educators, but also employee of the memorial sites, but also academics. So if you represent one of those groups, or maybe groups I didn't mention, you can also write about it on chat. So the aim for our meeting is this. It origins from the third anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which will take place next week, so 24th of February. We believe that the political situation is very dynamic and the world around us is changing very fast. We hear from you, the teachers, that the students are asking the question how to behave, how to find themselves in this very fast changing world. So we thought about this webinar as a method to address topics which are emerging in the classroom. Secondly, the discussion about the World War II is often based on emotions, on the memory conflict, on disinformation, which is, it's not rooted in the historical knowledge. That's why we thought we might have also this meeting to somehow fill this gap. And also the context is the fast approaching anniversary of the ending of the World War II, which will take place on 8th of May this year, so the 80th anniversary. So we are committed to speak about this legacy of the World War II 8 years after. In addition to that, we believe that there is a lot to learn from each other, also in the international context, because each of you represents some country, and we are very much open to your input. We'll also ask a question how those topics work in your countries and in the context of your country. So you are very much invited to share your country's perspective, because we just discovered that the national narratives are not enough to cover this subject, which requires international approach. Yes, we also know that communicating and teaching about the ongoing war, in certain countries it's more difficult than in different countries. So yes, maybe we can also talk about it, how to address this in a difficult political situation. Just few words for those of us who are our newcomers or people who just first participate in the ENRS's events. So we are aiming to foster the dialogue about the 20th century European history. The network, there are 5 countries included, so Poland, Germany, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. But those are those yellow countries, but also the blue countries, those are the observer countries. But also we've got the partners in very different countries across Europe, not only Europe. We've got an interactive map, which is available on our website, so we can get there and consult the partners, our partners in your countries. Few of the projects I wanted to talk about to you, because we've got a bunch of them, some for the academics, some for education, but those 3 are specifically for the teachers and educators. So first of all, Sound in the Silence. That's the project we're going to start recruitment process very shortly, because that's a project where students from 4 different countries, they meet in one of the memory places across Europe. Then they've got the professional arts workshops with artists like rap, poetry, and dancing. And then on the field of the memory place, they prepare their own final performance, which is an artistic performance, which enables them to speak about the different and difficult emotions they encounter being at the memory place itself. So you're very much invited to apply with your students. And the second project is called In Between, and this year it would be special because we will have edition for teachers only. and for the students, not the students from schools, but like university students. So those two groups will meet in Zgorzelec-Gorlic at the Polish-German borderland, and then they will also have the workshop. They will have the workshop with photographers, and also the students. They will be creating the podcasts, and the teachers they will be preparing the photo exhibition. So for those two projects, you are really invited to apply and to be part of it. And the fourth option is the European Remembrance Symposium, which is a meeting rather for those of you who are representative of the memory places or people who are very much engaged in the memory studies. This event will take place in June in Helsinki. So you're also invited to be there. So just briefly about the high story lessons, which is the framework for our meeting. That's an online platform. You can get there. It exists in 6 languages, and here we put all the teaching resources we created in our work. We're committed to create engaging visuals and animated lesson introductions. For example, here you can have a slide which speaks about the history of economy. And then we are developing our teaching resources with and for teachers. So we are very much looking for the contributors too. So if you're a content creator yourself, just write me an email, and we are also looking for authors of our teaching resources. And yeah, that's our topics we're covering, for example, so about the Marshall Plan, or about the Holodomor, so the great famine in Ukraine in the 30s, or we are very much also to speak about the commemoration of the Holocaust. Getting a little bit into our topic, so disinformation and memory conflicts, we've got 7 lessons which tackle exclusively memory conflict and disinformation. You can see what are the titles of those lessons. And here below the lesson title, you can see what's inside the given lesson. So whether it is an article or a lesson plan or a video, graphics, or other teaching resources which will enable you to prepare a lesson on the given subject. Yeah, so that's the example of teaching resources we propose inside those lessons. So we've got, for example, an article about Russia's Twitter propaganda, or a short movie, How to Win a Memory War, but also a selection of interesting graphics and photos which you can use to speak about the history of the 20th century. Okay, so I just wanted to display again the free meetings, the free webinar goals we've got for today, and that would be a point when I would like to give the floor to Bartłomiej, to ask him to introduce us a little bit more into the subject.
Thank you, Urszula. I'm going to share my screen. I was busy reading our chat, checking where you're all from, and I saw that Romania, Lithuania, Estonia, Ukraine, Germany, Greece. I wish I could tell good afternoon in all those languages. But unfortunately I can't. So I want to start with a caveat. I prepared my presentation specifically for teachers. I saw a list of participants that Ula shared with me before our meeting, and I saw some people are coming from different fields. So I just want to warn you that my goal is to give some tools that could be useful for teachers teaching at schools. And after the whole meeting, after the presentation, you're going to receive a little gift from me. Urszula will share it with you. I prepared some exercises that you could use during your history lessons. So having said that, I want to tell just very briefly a little bit about the institution I'm working at. It's called the Mieroszewski Centre. Very difficult to pronounce, but it's a trademark of Polish institution to name them that foreigners cannot pronounce it. But what we do, we are a hybrid institution, sort of. We are under the Ministry Ministry of Culture of the Republic of Poland. That is, we are publicly funded, and we cover Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Georgia, and Moldova. We have projects aimed at also teachers, but also we are a sort of academic / think tank institution, and I'm more involved in the latter part of our actions. And my specialization is specifically memory and history of the Soviet Union. I've been in this business for already 11 years, so I think I know a little bit. And my current research project is dedicated to Russia's politics of memory towards Poland and Ukraine, 1999-2022. And having said that, I want to start with a methodological clarification, because I know that among academics and specialists and pundits, there's a debate: what is memory, what is history, where are the differences? Maybe they're the same. Some would argue that they're completely different animals, nothing to share. They don't share nothing. Others would argue that memory and history are basically the same. My approach is following. For me, memory and history are two different ways. I want to highlight different ways of interpreting the past. They are interrelated, they're intertwined very often, but they are not the same for one simple reason. Memory has different goal. It's mainly about community building, be it national community, be it social community, be it class community, be it gender community. History, as such, is trying to understand how it actually was. As famously in the 19th century, Leopold von Ranke had asked. And for this reason, I know, because I also was a teacher for 2 years, it's very difficult to introduce this topic and this differentiation during the history lessons. What is memory? What is history? What's the difference? And how to explain it to students. And I'm going to grapple with it during my presentation. But to warm me up a little bit, so that not only I'll be speaking during our meeting today, I want to ask you, every one of you, what was the result of World War II for your country? And if you could respond, Ursula will now share with you a questionnaire, and if you could respond briefly and as concise as possible, I would be very, very grateful. It would help me to go further and explain what I'm going to talk about. Just give us 60 seconds.
Yeah. I've seen the first person who replied. You should see the poll on the screen with a little box to answer a question. And I repeat the question: what was the result of World War II in your country?
Okay, 16 people responded. Let's wait a little bit. Someone has joined from Taiwan. Hello.
Don't hesitate. It's not like about historical facts or stuff like that. You just need to. How do you feel about it? What was the result for your country?
Okay, let's wait extra 20 seconds, and then Ursula will share the results with us.
Yeah, 40% of you participated.
Right now it's almost 50.
Maybe let's get to 50. And we'll close
That's a very active group, actually.
I think I'm going to close it. If you didn't manage to write your answer, you can always add it on chat and we're going to see it through chat. Yeah, I'm sharing the results.
Okay, but I don't see them. So if you could share maybe the screen, your screen, which you're seeing, it would be really nice because I think the participants see it. I don't see it.
I don't see them either.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I can share. I can share my screen. Yeah, I'm gonna stop share and I'm just gonna share results. Stop share. Yeah. I know how to do it. I'm gonna share my the pool result through the browser.
Okay. Excellent. So let's read a little bit. So we see communism, freedom and socialism, repressions, political dependence from the USSR, isolation, freedom, communism, installation supported from Soviet Union and Yugoslavia. This regime lasts 45 years. Mass destructions, partisans liberated our country. End of Japanese rule. UN transferred China's seat from the Republic of Taiwan to the PRC. Borders were changed and Communist Party took the power. Lose territory from Romania. Bring the communists in power. So from this little sample, you can already see that there are some topics and feelings and results that are somehow overlapping, but we don't have a single opinion about the result of the Second World War for our own country, for our own respective countries. And I assume that most of you are specialists in history in the past, because it's a seminar dedicated to teachers. And if we cannot agree on this very issue from the specialist point of view, the story with memory is getting more and more complicated because here we've got also emotions in play, and that's what I'm gonna be talking about. I'm going back to sharing the screen with regard to Russia. But let me first give my response about Poland. I think Poland lost the Second World War, even though on May the 2nd there was a Polish flag at the top of Reichstag, and even though Poland was among the countries that won the Second World War, I think Poland lost the Second World War mainly because three reasons. First, Poland lost 48% of its pre-war territory. Poland lost 5.6 million of its citizens, not only of Polish descent, but also Jewish, Belarusian, Ukrainian. And Poland became dependent on the Soviet Union for the next 45 years. So that's the paradox. But how the Second World War is being commemorated in Russia, and what does the Second World War mean to Russia today? I assume that every one of you has a vague, at least vague understanding of what the Second World War is to Russia. But let me start with this word. It's exceptionalism. It's exceptionalism based on two technicalities, I would say. First, Russia is celebrating the end of the Second World War on 9th of May, not on 8th of May. It's because mainly of the time difference when the capitulation of Germany was signed in 1945, but it allowed the Soviet Union in 1965, when the big celebrations were launched by then Brezhnev regime, it allowed to somehow differentiate from the whole world and focus the attention of the whole world on themselves. And it is being continued right now by Vladimir Putin regime. Second, they don't use the term Second World War. They use the term the Great Patriotic War. It's something very different, and it's also building this exceptionalism that you can see right now in the public discourse, and it is being employed by the Russian political elites. So basically what they're saying, we are different. Here you can see the parade in Moscow. It's also very different from what we see in Europe, or rather we do not see, because there are no such big celebrations in Europe, and it's also very different. It's focused mainly on militarism, celebrating the great victory. The word you can see here on this installation, it says in Russian "Победа," which basically translates into victory. And when you say "Победа" in Russia or to a Russian, you can be 100% sure that he or she will associate it with the period of 1941-45. And it's basically, if you compare the pictures of 9th of May from the Soviet period with today's, it's very similar, right? Maybe the rockets are bigger during the Soviet era, but right now, the whole emploi is very, very similar. There is this slogan, also quite popular in Russia, which is completely different from the culture of memory that we have in Europe, because Russians are saying that we can beat the Nazis like we did in 1941-45. But in Europe, we have the slogan "Never Again." It's based on completely different presumptions, on completely different values, and it's being celebrated differently. And another very important feature that could be used during your history lessons is the number of 27 million. This number is being repeated very often by Russian political elites in the public discourse, and it refers to, of course, to the number of victims and casualties that the USSR suffered during the Second World War, because it's based on this concept that the greater the suffering, the greater the victory. It's not about mourning people that we lost during the Second World War. It's not about commemorating every single person. It's more about celebrating actually the victory. I know it may sound banal, but it's a little bit different from what we know. From how we remember the Second World War, and it's very different also from what you gave in your answers to my question. It's very different. So as you can see, we can be talking about the same period, about the same history, but the answers and the interpretations might be different, and it affects directly or indirectly how we remember those events and what we do with them politically. But let's delve a little bit deeper into this number of 27 million people, because it could be a very good exercise for students and to ask them percentage suffered the most casualties, where the losses were the highest given the population percentage. And there, I think, starts a very interesting story. Because if you take a look at the map and how and where the Second World War took place, on which country's territory it took place, starting from 1939 until 1945, it's mainly today's Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. It's Belarus and it's Ukraine. It's only a little bit of today's Russian Federation. And then take a look at the statistics. Here is the statistics based on a book by a Russian scholar who tried to count basically the casualties during the Second World War. And if you take a look a little bit closer and zoom in at percentage of population that lost, the highest number is in Belarusian Socialist Republic. Almost every fourth citizen of the Belarusian Socialist Republic died during the Second World War, 25%. Then Ukrainian Socialist Republic, it's 16.3%. Then, if I focused here only on the so-called Slavic republics of the former USSR because they are the most important politically right now. But then would be Armenian Republic 13.6%, and then Latvian 13.7%, and then only the Russian Socialist Republic. So in absolute numbers, of course, Russian Socialist Republic suffered the most, the most victims. But if you take a look at percentage, there's a completely different story. And I think that's something that is missing today from the public discourse. Everyone is associating the Second World War and the 9th of May only with Russia. It's not true. It's basically not true. And you can see it in discourse of politicians saying, for instance, I remember, I just recall right now a situation when one of the German politicians, right after the full-scale invasion, the Russian full-scale invasion against Ukraine, said something about the Second World War and that the Russians won the Second World War, and then Ukrainians reacted, well, take a look at the map where the Second World War took place actually, and who was fighting at the time. So it's a completely, so it's a little bit more complicated. But just having said that, just let me use also some other examples that Russia has been using the Second World War and its aggression against Ukraine, because the main feature I can see, the way that the narrative was shaped, actually not, it hasn't started only in 2022. It has started much earlier with the annexation of Crimea. We have observed these narratives when the Crimean issue started, when Russia launched its aggression also in Donbass in 2014. And here are the references to the Great Patriotic War in 2014. So it's 11 years ago. In main Russian media outlets such as Komsomolskaya Pravda, Rossiyskaya Gazeta, these are the main Russian media outlets, and you can see that it's very, very often used, not during the periods that we would expect the Russian media to refer to the Second World War, that is 9th of May, but it's March, it's April, it's May, of course. Why? Because it has been employed as a tool to mobilize and also to explain the Russian society that as your grandparents had fought against the Nazis 50, 60, 70 years ago, we are continuing that fight today against Ukraine, because basically that's one of the main narratives spread by the Russian media and the Russian propaganda, so as to convince the Russian population to support the war against Ukraine. You are on the right side, as your grandparents were at the time in 1941, 1945. And it's a very clever, I would say, from the political technology point of view, from the propaganda point of view, because they are not creating new narratives, they're using the existing ones, which are very, very important for the Russians, because whatever you think of the Russian Federation and the Russian population right now, their identity, one of the main pillars of their identity is the Great Patriotic War. Another example, it's based on the statistics of EU versus disinfo. Take a look at the green line. It shows how often the word Nazi appeared in the main Russian media outlets before the full-scale invasion, right before. And you have the peak right, I think, when February starts around. It indicates something. It shows also that Russia, the Russian Federation, and the Russian propagandists are using historical references so as to signal us what they are planning to do, what they are possibly planning to do, and how they are framing the whole present time in political and using historical terms. And I think it's very important because aims. It's very important to notice that it's not only about debunking and saying that, well, there are no Nazis in Ukraine, as we all know. It's about something more. I mean, we could, by focusing on the historical language that Russia is employing, we can assume or surmise that something might happen in the future. But it's more like a political conclusion here right now, not a historical one. But you have this term denazification, and it's also, I think, this chart corresponds very well with what Putin declared on 24th of February, the so-called denazification of Ukraine. It has been prepared. The whole media landscape has been prepared to portray the upcoming actions as Vladimir Putin did on 24th of February, and and I wanna give you other examples. I see that people are asking if you could remove the pop-up message from the screen.
I mean, you can click OK at the bottom when you've got application app. Zoom is sharing your screen. So
Okay.
you can stop sharing, or you can click, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's working. Okay, sorry for this technicality. So that's one of the examples. I mean, on the level of words, on the level of events that the Russian Federation is referring to, there is this framing of the current political events. But there is much more. Here I want to show you 2-3 posters that I downloaded from the website of the Russian Ministry of Defense. They are very fancy, I would say, in terms of graphics, but they are also referring to the historical events, even if you don't see it at first sight. But here, the word that is referring to the historical events is "победе," which is victory. As I told you at the very beginning of this presentation, this word victory is associated clearly in Russia with 1941, 1945. And through this framing, the Russian Federation is trying to encourage Russian male to draft and join the army and to support aggression against Ukraine. And here you have the poster from the period of the Second World War. The phrasing is actually the same. It's actually the same. Onwards to victory. So on the level of slogans that have existed in the Russian and the Soviet political culture, memory culture as well, they're being employed, although with different graphics, right? Although with different graphics. The second poster I would like to pay your attention to is this one. It basically says Russia, my history, my heroes, my soul, my country, my path. It's less important, but what's important is the Soviet emblem that you can see on the arm of the soldier. It clearly it clearly refers to also the period of the Second World War. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. It's a division, it's a unit, it's a military unit that had fought in 1945 in Berlin, and the military unit that whose soldiers put the Soviet flag at the entrance of Reichstag, at the entrance, not at the top, not the famous photo you all saw, I assume, but at the entrance. But it's considered a symbolic unit. So here are also some hints aimed at mobilizing the Russian society and explaining and framing the current war against Ukraine through the Second World War, through the Great Patriotic War, as they say, and that's basically the conclusion. But you can, wonder why. Why is that? Why Russia is framing the aggression against Ukraine through through the lenses of the Great Patriotic War. First, I already said that Russian identity revolves around 1941, 1945. It's the most important event in terms of memory culture. It has also, which is sometimes underestimated in Eastern Europe, also in my own country, it bears genuine emotions that are among Russians, because almost every Russian family have someone in their family who lost granddad or grandmom or someone during the Second World War, and that's something real that exists. It's not something that was that is imagined or imposed from outside. It is there. So, but the thing is, what you do with it politically? You can mobilize it for the purpose of aggression against Ukraine, but you can do with it something very different. Second, I already told you about the emotions, but it also gives you a sense of belonging to something bigger. I mean, it's always the same about memory and a history, and how we tell our own histories to ourselves. We want to belong to something bigger, be the nation, be the social group, be the gender group. And in terms of in the case of Russia, it's about belonging to the Russian nation, and also it has some moral component in it. Moral component. I mean that we are on the right side of history. We defeated the great evil in 1941, 1945, and we're going to defeat it right now. That's basically what the Russian propaganda is saying to the Russians. It also shows you how the past, I'm deliberately using the term past, not history, how the managed past is powerful. First, because it's very cheap. It costs much less to produce such posters or to frame the whole conflict with historical references than build a prospering good economy or create new, I don't know, AI centers. But with the past, you can achieve a lot. In this specific example, it's the aggressive politics of Russia against its neighbors in recent years. And I want to finish with exceptionalism, because Russia and Russians feel exceptional, at least in terms of the result of the Second World War and the role of Russia during the Second World War. But this image of exceptionalism is being projected to the outside world. I mean, Russians don't want to only convince themselves that they're exceptional because they defeated the Third Reich. They want to also convince the outside world that we are exceptional because we did it. We lost 27 million people during the Second World War. We put our flag at the top of Reichstag, and you may wonder if it's. Yes, I know that exceptionalism is very alive in the US too. I'm trying to read the chat at the same time, and I want to finish with the USA because I want to show you two tweets, two posts by the current president of the United States. First, in those two posts, he referred to the Second World War. And in the first post, he said that we must never forget that Russia helped us win the Second World War using almost 60 million, I don't know where this number comes from, lives in the process. But I think this shows you that in terms of building this sense of exceptionalism of Russia outside Russia, if I were a Russian propagandist, I would be very satisfied with this post. That's basically what I'm trying to say. And the second one, it's the post also by Donald Trump. He posted it after the call with Putin last week, and I think it's not a coincidence that he also mentioned that they talked about the Second World War. And here you also see exceptionalism of Russia that is being admitted by Donald Trump. You see monopolizing tendency of monopolizing tendencies that everything revolves around Russia when it comes to the Second World War, but with a little bit of statistics that I tried to share with you at the in the first part of my presentation. I wanted to highlight that it is not so easy, that history is much more complicated, and if we get it wrong, we might end up with bad results, political results, in the future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. It's not obviously the end of our meeting, so don't go, please, our audience. Thank you very much for this interesting presentation. I was struck, especially when you said about comparing we can repeat and never again, because it's really, it might be also, I think, a good introduction for the students, you know, or to, for example, to have those two sentences printed and just asking them, you know, what it can mean in practice, and how can they refer to those two notions, and also how those narratives are a little bit second-handed. I would say that they are just, you know, reused after a really long period of time. Okay, so I think that we already got two questions. I'm gonna send it to you. I just picked them from the chat. The one was about the Moldova, which is not directly about our question, but Bartek, if you want to comment on that, you can also too. So the two questions, I'm just sending them. Maybe I can send them to everyone too. And we're really very much looking forward to a question. You can ask them via Q&A session, as one of our speakers did about Donbas. And the second question it was about Moldova, so it was about a little bit in depth. And so just think for a while, do you want to address those two questions? And I've got the third one very short, which is precisely about your presentation, because on the chart you showed that the word chemical was also very much trending. So it was the word genocide and the word Nazi and chemical. So I was interested, you know, to which exactly referred, whether it was about like a biological weapon, or how it happened that the word was trending so much. Maybe it wanted to have some fear around the society.
Okay, so I cannot respond to this question about Moldova, because I don't feel myself a specialist about Moldova and Romania. So sorry, I'm gonna skip it. About Russians in Donbas, I think we cannot counter that. When it comes to the Russian population, I think we have a very small influence what Russians are thinking in Russia. It's about Russians themselves who feel, who declare themselves Democrats and anti-Putinist, to counter it. It's not our task. So when I'm talking right now about Russian population and Russians in Europe and in Ukraine also. It's not about countering, I would say. We have to be much faster. There has to be something like pre-debunking, so that we provide knowledge that is reliable in advance, and we can somehow foresee what Russians will be talking to us in the upcoming months and years, because it's not a rocket science that on 9th of May Russians will be talking about the Second World War. On 23rd of August, when the whole Eastern Europe will be commemorating the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact and saying that Hitler and Stalin divided the whole Europe, Russian embassies will be sending another message outside the world, saying that we entered Poland only when Poland had fallen and the Polish government escaped. So I would focus more on pre-debunking and trying to determine events, narratives that Russia has been using constantly in recent years. It's not so. I don't think it's very difficult to identify such narratives, and then try to work with them and the third question was about chemical, Ula, right? So I think it was a preparation. So I think it's Russian used it deliberately And this chemical weapon, Stepan Rauschenbach is right. I was about to say it, that it's about mimicking US from the period of the Iraq War. Basically, there is something bad going on in terms of chemical, biological, or nuclear weapon in Ukraine, and therefore we have to intervene as the US did in the Iraqi war. So it's mimicking and being cynical about the whole situation in Ukraine.
Yeah, because like, you know, like biological or chemical weapons, it really gets people scared. So like people are not very very calm when hearing such news, and it can really spread panic, even like panic situation in the cities or in in the countries. Okay, so thanks also for your comments. We're gonna skip Moldova. That's really that we got last year. We got a very interesting project in Chisinau, and there are like a lot of projects, I think, on the history of Moldova, which Titus is really exceptional in a way. So so we really encourage you to dig a little bit deeper into that, and maybe we can cover it also in the future through our website. And you're still encouraged to go on with the questions.
I see that Vai Yun Lin asked about trend narrative all over the world. In your opinion, what can we do to fight against this narrative and propaganda? But I don't know which narrative do you mean specifically. Could you be a little bit more specific, because I don't think that I understand your question. And how do you see the perspective of US-Russia relations in the context of the current war in Ukraine as a historian? So let me answer it with a historical analogy. I think that I can notice a lot of imperial empathy on both sides. That is this feeling that the big players understand each other much better than big player understanding medium player like Poland or other countries in Europe. And I can feel the sense in the whole communication going on right now between Moscow and the US. But I think we are only at the beginning of the whole process. I'm referring to the last meeting in Saudi Arabia between Americans and the Russians, and there's a lot of nervousness all around the world, specifically in Europe and Ukraine. But I would focus on deeds rather than words when it comes to the US actions, because even from the latest statements by Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, on one day in Brussels, he says that Ukraine won't join NATO because it's unrealistic goal. But the next day he says that everything is on the table, so he contradicts himself. My interpretation: everything is up to Trump and whatever Trump thinks, and it's complicated. I see some negative signals, at least from my point of view, but I think it's still too early to tell where the whole process will go further.
Bartek, I'll just give you a second to gather your thoughts, maybe for the the questions which are coming, and I'm just gonna share my screen for a second because it just got me thinking. So I mentioned that we've got an article which is called Russia's Twitter Propaganda. It's X now, but it was written a couple of years ago. And then you can it starts with really, I think, a good like opening question. So could a kitchen chair and electric chair be similar pieces of equipment just because they have similar names? So it's really, I think it's a really good question to open up to get interest among the students. But here also in this article, you can have examples of the tweets by the Russian ministries, which shows exactly what Wojtek said about the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact and how, from the Russian perspective, the Munich Agreement, so agreement from 1938, it's on the same level as the secret protocol of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. So meaning, okay, you already agreed with Hitler before the war. It means that we're just, we're securing our lands too. So it's really interesting to have those tweets to compare them. So I really encourage you to use the article and use the sources which are inside. And the second thing is that we also got the lesson plan, which is in a very different context because it is about the Holocaust and about the Wannsee Protocol. But it's called Why Do Numbers Count? And it starts with the exercise when students, they need to read the statements and then deciding whether do they agree or not agree with the statement. They need to, place themselves in the room, left or right or in the middle. And so, for example, the exemplar statements are, for example, it doesn't matter if there were, 10,000 or 10,010 people, or maybe numbers, they give a better idea, or we should remember especially the events where the numbers of victims is very high. So I think that this kind of opening activity, it also brings us into the setup where we do talk about the numbers, because they are very tricky, they might be misused, they might be not accurate. But it's somehow important to at least try to address them. Yeah, because it got me thinking because of what you said, Bartłomiej, about the numbers of victims from different socialist republics. Yeah.
I see more questions coming, so let me address them.
Pick some of them, because
I see a question about this narrative that NATO expansion was the principal cause of the Ukraine war. Yes, I can say that, it was NATO expansion was the principal cause of the Ukraine war. If you agree with the world in which the big countries decide the fate and foreign policy of the smaller and middle one, that is this imperial underpinning of the whole thinking in Russia, which basically boils down to the thing to thinking that the former Soviet satellites have no right to decide their own fate and whether they can join NATO, European Union, World Trade Organization, or other organization. Because it's not NATO expansion, actually. That's the problem with this framing. It's a decision of those countries to join NATO. It's not that NATO expanded somewhere and annexed some territories as an organization. It was the decision of Poles, Lithuanians, Estonians, Latvians, Czechs, Slovaks, Romanians, Bulgarians, and others to join NATO, and then NATO agreed to accept them. Through the framing of NATO expansion was the principal cause of the Ukraine war, you can already see what mental underpinnings there are. So that there is a great game strategy that someone is deciding the fate of mid-sized players like Poland and others, and it's completely different. And the story is much more complicated. And I'm just working on a book about this politics of memory, and I can tell you that I interviewed diplomats from US, Poland, Ukraine, and I was also expanding on this. Where does this narrative of NATO expansion comes from, and when did it start to appear? And I'm gonna share with you two things. One of the former Polish diplomat who for 15, 20 years worked at NATO headquarters, had a meeting with his Russian counterparts, and the Russian counterparts wanted from him to know if there is any document, stating that NATO officials allegedly promised Mikhail Gorbachev not to enlarge NATO 1 inch eastward. The response of my interlocutor was that, I mean, the Russians, you can go freely to the NATO archives, check everything, whatever you can, because you won't find nothing. And after several months, he met with them once again, and he asked them about whether they had found anything, and they said no, but the leader is saying different, so we have to abide and we have to follow the narrative. And that's basically how I see it. And the thing is also with NATO that if you remember the story correctly, 2013, 2014, there was no chance for Ukraine to join NATO. Not at all. That's the whole story about the Bucharest summit in 2008. So that's my response. Then may I ask about how Poland feels about losing its land before the Second World War and gaining land after Second World War? That's a very interesting question, and I think it shows completely different approach of Polish society and Polish political elites in comparison with the Russian ones. Because after the Second World War, Poland lost, as I said, 48% of its former pre-war territories, and Polish elites realized at some point that recognizing the very existence of Ukrainian nation, Lithuanian nation, Belarusian nation, and accepting the borders that we have after the Second World War actually contributes to our own security and to our own well-being and to our own economy, rather than former imperial thinking that was present among political elites during the Second World War on pre-Second World War. And there is no feeling or thinking, I would say, you won't find in the recent 30 years there was no Polish political party in Polish parliament which argued in favor of that Lviv is Polish or Vilnius is Polish or Grodno is Polish. Not at all. Vice versa. Polish politicians argued that Ukraine should be an independent state, Lithuania should be an independent state, and Belarus also should be an independent state. And that's the lesson we drew from the Second World War. That instead of fighting over borders, we can create something bigger. And I think it's also referring to the story of the European Union and what happened after the Second World War, for instance, between French and Germans, and that they are not fighting anymore about Strasbourg and whether you should eat currywurst in Strasbourg or eat French cheese, Ruche Blanche de Savoie. And I think that's the key difference. And Russia right now is saying that by saying that Kyiv is a Russian city, is actually playing with this imperial thinking. Taiwan, many people support Ukraine. Okay, but there are some people who believe that Russia has the right to invade. What can we do? The other grand narrative is Poland. Also who believe that Taiwan is independent, but there are others as part of China. So my question: how to fight against such narratives and propaganda? Well, if there are people in Taiwan believing that Russia has the right to invade Ukraine, are they also thinking that China has the right to invade Taiwan? I would start with a very simple question, because I mean, if you accept that the big guy in the room has right to bully the smaller ones, then take a look at yourself. And I think that I would start with this question.
There was also Bartek, a comment. Sorry, maybe I interrupt you. Or
yeah.
Sure. There was a question about the Gen Z And I encourage you to also to our participants to maybe dwell a little bit on that, because it was about that Gen Z is most likely to embrace the narrative that the Russian was not so bad in the World War II, and also the memories of survivors are simply bullshit. That's what's written in the comment. But I think that you mentioned in your comment, our participant mentioned the Gen Z, but maybe I don't know what was your intention, and I encourage you to write a little bit more about what was intention about the Gen Z. But my question was also about the tools used for propaganda. So maybe because Gen Z is very much involved into the digital tools, but also your students who are from the younger generation. And I thought about how do digital media influence the spread of of Russian historical disinformation. And I thought, could you maybe tell some difference between like Russian disinformation like now or 10 years ago, or maybe those are only tools which changed. So now we've got like AI, deep fakes, and social media. So we know everyone that, there are more and more disinformation on social media. Yeah, but so that's the general question, how it is very much driven by the social media and digital tools now.
So the key difference between 2013-14 and nowadays is that in 2013-14 you had official Russian media operating in the European Union and in the United States, such as Russia Today, Sputnik, and others. Right now they are banned from the European Union and the United States. So the methods that Russia is employing have changed. They evolved, and right now they are using. In recent months, there was this story uncovered by journalists, the so-called Operation Doppelganger, which basically the whole idea was that the Russians were creating websites of the official newspapers, such as in the US, Washington Post, or in Poland, Gazeta Wyborcza, or in Italy, Corriere della Sera, or in France, Le Monde. Which looked actually very similar to the official websites of those media outlets.
Yeah.
But when you read the articles, they had some Russian narratives in it. So it's they just changed the clothes, I would say, and it has been discussed recently by journalists. The second method new that we can see, and here I refer to what Americans revealed, is that Russians are using and looking for people, individuals, not big media companies, individuals in all over the world, in the European Union, in the US, and others, who would be willing to cooperate with them and spread some narrative statements in their own social media. Because the world has changed. Every one of us can be a media company, actually, can have a YouTube channel, TikTok channel, Instagram. I myself have a YouTube channel, and that is different. So it's I would say right now it is much more sophisticated, because it's sometimes it's quite difficult to attribute whether this particular person is spreading somehow Russian narrative, or is he or she doing it because he or she believes in it, or she is on a payroll. So that's completely different, and I think it relates very well to this question about Generation Z, because that's something I think we are missing as the older generation. I consider myself old. I don't use TikTok. Because we actually don't really know fully what is being shown on TikTok, by whom, and how it is being consumed by younger generation. And I think we need our own literacy. I mean, by us, we educators, we need our own literacy, and we have to learn how it works. Because if we don't do it, we're gonna be one step behind what is going on, and the whole story in Romania, which is very worrying, is also very is a good example that we have to do something about it.
You mean the elections?
Yes, the elections.
I'm going to post one question more who came through the Q&A, and I'm going to read it. It's from Sehi, so from the Ukrainian perspective. Russia claims to be the sole victor over Nazism, while Ukraine is mostly represented through its nationalistic movement, even in the West. How can Ukraine find its deserved place among the countries that fought against Nazism?
Whoa, that's a question to Ukrainians, not to me, I would say. Because it's more about memory rather than history. And when it comes to memory, you have to decide by yourself who you are actually, because it boils down to this question, who you are, whether you feel yourself to be someone who won the Second World War or who suffered during the Second World War. But I think it would be in general, I wish there will be some international celebrations in Europe on 8th of May, because by doing it, we're gonna shape the media narrative all over the world that it's also important for us. Not the whole attention will be focused on Russia, that it's going to celebrate 9th of May this year, and Vladimir Putin will be celebrating it with the leaders from North Korea and China, for instance, and the slogan "Never Again" could be a good way to communicate that we are against repeating what happened 1941, 1945, and that's our culture differs completely from the Russian one, and I think there has to be also a strategic signaling to Russia that it may sound banal, but that we are ready to defend our own values in which we believe in. Basically, I don't see any other way to confront it.
Yeah, but also the statistics you mentioned, so the casualties, the losses, also it also somehow unpacks and it shows how the victims of the World War II do not mean 60 million of Russians. So it means that they were not the sole victims. So I would answering Serhi to your question is that everyone has its own share in this.
Yes.
And partially we also the question we brought at the very beginning. So what does it mean the 8th of May? So it somehow it means the victory, but somehow it means the loss. So it's like it's not it's ambiguous, and I think it's really worth to unpack it and to prepare ourselves a little bit in advance to have a spotlight on that, and to be ready for some classes, for lessons. We're gonna also as a history lessons team, we're gonna publish a set of teaching resources which can be used for 8th of May, and yeah, we're strongly encouraged to somehow bring in the subject to the classroom.
And I see a very specific question from Anita Sabina Niculescu. Does anyone here on chat know if after the creation of the DDR was Russian language classes mandatory in the school curriculum of East Germany? I think yes, because that's why Angela Merkel speaks Russian.
Yeah, I hope to. Okay, so we've got still 15 minutes. I think that we can have one or two more questions. I'm gonna ask one of my questions, and then we're gonna pick one more from the chat. Which is very general. So we talk a lot about the remembrance and what they want, what everyone wants to remember about the past, which heroes to pick, which casualties and losses needs to be remembered and commemorated in the public sphere. And my question is, what aspects of the World War II does Russia prefer to forget?
First, I think it wants to forget that it's not only Russia's victory and not only Russian victims. And here I would highlight not only the losses of Ukrainian Republic, Armenian, Lithuanian, and Latvian, but take a look at how Holocaust is being remembered in Russia. Of course, Holocaust is being remembered in Russia, but if you look much closer at monuments that actually were erected during the Soviet era, and they are still preserved in Russia, they are commemorating not mostly, I'm saying in the most cases, not the Jewish communities that were killed by the Nazis during the Second World War, but you have the wording, the Soviet citizens were killed. So no ethnic attribution in it. So from this point of view, that's one thing. The second thing, yes, I can agree with Russians that Russians liberated Eastern Europe from the Nazis, but they didn't bring freedom to all the nations of Eastern Europe because they didn't have their own freedom. I mean, and that's something that they are that there is missing from the Russian narrative, and they tend to forget it. That they occupied the Baltic states up until 1991. That they controlled its satellites in Eastern Bloc. That they basically broke the Yalta agreements very fast and very soon after they signed the Yalta agreement, because in the Yalta agreement signed by big free guys at the time, you had this promise that in Poland there will be free and unfettered elections. And in 1947 there were elections in Poland, but they were falsified by the Polish communists with help of some Soviet delegates sent from Moscow. And right now there is this narrative of Yalta as a great example of cooperation between the big states on the international area. But actually, it's not so. Well, if you ignore the perspective of the smaller ones, then yeah, I mean, yeah, you can argue that maybe it's a good example, but it's everything boils down to the values, to the international law, whether you want to respect it or not. And yeah, I would highlight these three things. That the first, monopolization and focus solely on Russian victims, and nothing else happened. Second, Holocaust, which is also missing from the narrative very often. And if it's mentioned, it is mentioned only in the context of the Red Army liberating some concentration camp, and that's all. And third, the fact that Russia, actually the Soviet Union, subjugated its neighbors and people that they that the lands they entered into during the Second World War. Haha, do you think that real power still matter? How can you, a small country, military weak, can compare to a big powerful one and expect the same right?
This is such a good question, I would say. You know, it's like also for the students, because I think if, for example, people are watching now, you know, a preparation for peace talks, or like Trump calling Putin. So we are like, who we are, you know, at all, because you just perceive yourself as a, you know, as someone who's not power in to get into really real conversation. And it links a little bit with a question I wanted to ask about Yalta conference. So about this kind of moment also, when, you know, everything stops and there is a closed room somewhere with a table in the middle, and like powerful people taking decisions, and like, you know, having a map of the world and deciding. So maybe a comment, Bartłomiej. Yeah.
Real power and big powerful one. I think in terms of military aspects, take a look at what happened in Afghanistan. It's a small, military weak country that actually, whatever we think, coped very well with the Americans and then previously with the Soviets ones. So that's a military aspect. But then comes the international law aspect. And I know that you can say that, yes, of course, you're an idealist living in a world where fairy tales are true. But it really depends on what values you want to build the international relations. Whether it's pure strength, then I would say you can join the club of Vladimir Putin. Not a problem. Everything will be decided by pure strength. Or we agree to some set of rules to which all agree. And there are some more equals than others. Here I refer to the members of the Security Council of the United Nations organization. But still, if we agree to certain kind of rules, we abide them. It's the UN Charter. It's also the OSCE, Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. Actually, the whole process was animated by the Soviet Union, and the Helsinki Act was signed by the Soviet Union. And by this, if you impose political cost on the big powers and you somehow can convince them that they also can use international law in their own interest, and because it contributes to their own interest, then I think, I think a small country has a big say also in relations with the big ones. And Ula, could you also repeat your question, because I think I forgot.
Oh, it was about Yalta, so how it was contextualized. But I think that we are a little bit running out of time.
Okay.
And I would like to mention just one brief also information for you. So, Bartek, could you maybe wrap it up in like some closing, let's say, remarks? And I'm just gonna, so if you want to just close with some ideas or some thoughts, that would be just last 2 minutes. But I'm just gonna wanted to show you one last thing and invite you to take part in the contest we've got, which is called Grandparent Grand Stories. So there's still a possibility to apply until the 15th of March. This is the contest for students and teachers, where they can send us the family and local stories from the World War II. It can be a movie, it can be an essay. There are like different formats on the website. There's a very nice short clip in the presentation I'm gonna send you over, so you can screen it to your students and ask them, invite them to, gather some of the family stories. And we really would be, there's a prize in the contest, so you can just take a look and think, do you want to participate with your class? So I didn't want to miss that. Okay, Bartłomiej, do you want to somehow maybe conclude or to sum up our discussion?
I don't have any bright idea and any bright conclusion to end our webinar. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope the gift you're gonna receive from me is gonna be useful for you. If you have any other questions to me, don't hesitate to reach me. I think there will be somewhere my email, and Yeah, and good luck in your professional life. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was really insightful, and I really appreciate how you managed to answer really all the questions, and there were a lot of them. And I think it's gonna be just useful for the teachers to listen to that. There'll also be gonna be a recording from our meeting. So if you want to repeat something, you can rewatch. And I really, really very much appreciate your input and your questions. And I also very much want to thank you, those of you who answered to your colleagues, because some of the questions we didn't really need to answer because they were answered by yourselves. And that's why I really would call this like international approach and explaining how it worked in different countries. So again, thank you very much. Have a great afternoon and see you during our next sessions. Thanks. Thank you very much for the translators to Albanian. Sorry, I didn't mention that.